Welcome to the Secret Underground Laboratory Recovery and Salvage, where rude mechanicals do magic. Hello, I'm Bronze Age, Director of the Secret Underground Laboratory Recovery and Salvage, and today we're at the lamp bench where I'm going to rewire Colonel Mustard's candlestick. Now, this may not actually be Colonel Mustard's candlestick, but there's no evidence to indicate that it's not. I think this is early 20th century French, mainly because of the style and the hardware. The base is cast. We've got a ring of lilies all the way around it, coming up to these pretty much standard form here, to this candle cup, which has little crosses cut into it in the pierce work. Half the crosses are upside down. I'll let everybody make their own judgment about that. It has a turn switch here, which we're going to abandon but leave in place. The cord itself is double cloth jacketed. I'm sure this is the original. Outer jacket. Each individual wire has another jacket, and underneath that there is a rubber insulation. And if we look up closely there, we can see the rubber insulation is breaking apart. One interesting detail is the bottom of this is not held on with screws or any other kind of mechanical fastener. It's a piece of sheet steel that's been soldered to the brass base. So, first thing we have to do is get inside this piece. Now, this bottom plate originally would have been installed using one of these, which is called a tinning iron, which is an odd name because it's mostly made of copper. This one says Tool Crib on this side and Chevrolet Motor Company, Detroit, Michigan. So I'm pretty confident this tinning iron is probably as old as the lamp. And what they would do is they would stick this in the kiln or the forge, or maybe even with a torch, get it nice and hot, come to the spots where they wanted to solder, apply a little bit of flux, which was usually an acid, which would wash away any grease or oil, and then they would hold this down to the two pieces of metal and stick the solder on it, and it would flow wherever the flux had cleaned it up. It looks like they were a little too enthusiastic because there's a few spots here on the base where it appears the acid is actually eaten into the brass. To get the bottom plate off, I'm going to find a spot where I can get a thin blade underneath here and apply just enough heat to get this solder. Come around and repeat this. This one has got a little bit more solder on it. There we go. Now what we have in here is not too surprising. We've got our switch right here, and again the cloth jacketed wires. And all of this stuff here is called friction tape. That is a cloth tape that's impregnated with rubber. And back in the old days, it was preferred for covering up wiring connections and junctions and stuff like that, because the rubber would seal the wires in and protect it from moisture and stuff like that. It did tend to get brittle, and if you had to go work on something that was, like in this case, 100 years old, is that the stuff tended to crumble and break away. But it was all they had, so that was what they used. Up at the other end, there's a little screw through the candle cup that holds the cup and the socket in place. When I see a screw like this, I just assume that it's seized, because the last thing I want to do is break it off in the lamp or round out the slot so that a screwdriver can't hold it. So the first thing I do is I've got a little shop-made tool, just a piece of hacksaw with the end of it ground nice and straight, a little tape on it, and I can stick that in there and I can dig out whatever grime and goo is in the slot, because I want that screwdriver to go in there nice and deep. Then I take the screwdriver and a sharpening stone and I get the tip flat and the edges nice and square, and just before I try the screwdriver, I get my soldering gun out, get it nice and hot, and then I hold it down on the screw. And I have yet to have one where this didn't actually loosen the screw. It's amazing. Don't have to get that hot, just enough to get the molecules moving around. And I can stick my screwdriver in there and make sure I've got it straight with the screw. Yep, and it comes loose. And this is the point where we all count our blessings. And a screw that comes out without a fight is certainly one. Now I can remove the socket in the candle cup, and we're ready to start putting this thing back together with the latest in 21st century lighting hardware. This is the socket that's going to go back in it, and since I don't have this little hole where the set screw goes, this is going to have to be fastened down to the pipe nipple, and that's fairly deep, and that presents a peculiar problem, but nothing we can't overcome. It goes over here, and this nut is going to hold it down. Now I'm never going to get this started with just my fingers, so I'm going to use this nut driver with a socket, but obviously that's not going to work very well. So I've got a piece of packing foam, punch out a little plug, stick it in there, small piece of shop towel, and just stick it on there. Now before I put this in here, I apply a generous dose of blue thread lock. And that gets it started. To tighten it down completely, I've got a deep 9/16 socket that I have ground a bevel around all the edges, so it'll get deeper into this dished part. The next problem is getting the wire up to the top of the lamp. And if it had a pipe all the way up the center, that'd be fairly simple. You could just push the cord all the way through it, and it would come out with no trouble. But these pieces are cast, and the inside are fairly rough, and there's a couple of necks here where it's got to get through, so that calls for another special trick. First thing is put it through the hole in the base, because if you forget that, then everything else after that is just a waste of time. And I've got a cord protector that I'm going to slide on here, install it last. And to fish the cord through the pipe, I've got a piece of 1/16 inch brazing rod. Now I push the brazing rod all the way down through the pipe, and to connect the cord to it, I'm going to use a piece of small shrink wrap. I could tape this, but I want to keep it as streamlined as possible. Heat it up a little bit, and I start pushing. And pulling on the brazing rod at the same time, and it will guide it all the way up to the top. Just like that. And now a quick word about wiring sockets. Lamp cord sold in North America has one side smooth, one side has ridges. The sockets have one screw is brass colored, one is silver colored. And the side with the ridges always goes under the silver screw. Get this pulled out here. You wrap it around the screw clockwise. Trying to get this on camera. A little awkward. Get it tucked up underneath the screw, and then when you tighten it down, it will draw the wire under the terminal. And we do the same thing with the smooth wire on the brass screw. Now this is important, especially in table lamps, because the silver screw goes to the shell. And if you were to walk into a dark room and want to turn on the lamp and there was no bulb in the socket, if you touch the shell of a properly wired lamp, you won't get shocked. Now, we come to a point where I have to explain that there's a right way and there's a wrong way, and sometimes there's the only way. And there's no way to wire this socket with it installed in this cup. So the only thing I can do is apply a little more thread lock to the socket and feed it down in here and turn it. Now what that means is that I'm twisting the cord, and that's always a bad practice. However, I've got enough slack in this cord down in the pipe here so that it's not going to get unduly twisted, and I can pull out enough slack to get it straight before it's finished. Now that I've got it started, I've got another only way technique. I'm going to put a bulb in here and tighten it down to make sure I've got that socket seated. And then I'm going to have to depend on that blue thread lock to hold it in place. And to get it out without it unscrewing, I jam it with this little screwdriver blade and test it. And yeah, I think that's pretty good. Last piece is the insulator. It goes down over the shell. Down here at the bottom again, I can install my cord protector. And to prevent this cord from being yanked out if it gets tripped over in the dark, I'm going to put a pair of zip ties and that'll serve very well. The last thing to do is to install that's the next to the last thing to do is to install a cord switch. And I have a video on installing about 6 different kinds of cord switches, and I'll probably forget to put that in the comments. The bottom is going to be reattached with a modern equivalent of solder, JB Weld. All I got to do is just put a few dabs of it around here on the rim. And the cool thing about this is, if anybody ever needs to take it apart again, JB Weld can be removed, or at least broken, with about the same amount of heat from a small torch as it took to get the solder loose. Put that on there, appropriate shaped weight, and wait for that to set up. Now I'm sure the question is going to be asked, why didn't we use the old switch, or why didn't I replace the old switch? 2 reasons. First, This switch is well over 100 years old. If we put it back into daily use, it's probably going to fail. Who knows when? Probably sooner than later. Second, modern switches simply don't match the style. They would stick out like a sore thumb and be obvious they've been replaced. So it was just a little more practical to put a cord switch on it, leave the old switch on there just for appearance sake. So, this is Bronze Age for the Secret Underground Laboratory Recovery and Salvage. Thank you for sitting through this video about Colonel Mustard's Candlestick. And we really appreciate a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already. And again, thank you for watching.